Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and the author of The Codist. The second edition is now out. The Kindle price is $2.99. Go to Amazon right now and get a copy of The Story of the Weaponization of DNA. Now, I know that you probably got a 23andMe kit for your holiday gift this year, and you're all excited about your DNA. But what if Satan was going to use a Y chromosome marker to determine if you were part of the Levitical line that was going to be part of the Sanhedrin that was going to call for the return of Jesus? And what if he knew how to weaponize that? Well, if that was happening, and it is, my friends, this is that story about the Codist and the weaponization of DNA to wipe out the Jewish lineage so that Satan can continue to rule the world. $2.99 on Kindle right now. You can get paperback as well. Also want to introduce you to my latest book, The 7 Laws of Abundant Living, Lessons Learned from the Tree of Life, taking you on a journey right there back to the Garden of Eden. If it was so important to God that we were kicked out of it and have been kicked out of it for almost 6,000 years, why don't we look at the lessons that were learned right there in the garden? This takes you on a journey through that tree from the ground all the way out to the fruit. Go to ignitinganation.com, scroll to the bottom of the page, click on the book cover. Give us your email address, and we'll give you a free copy of the first chapter. It's my privilege today to introduce you to our newest friend, Herd Midkiff, author of Our Beating Hearts, a memoir. Herd, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Eric.
Herd has a Bachelor of Administration from Texas Christian University, as well as a Master of Business Administration from SMU. He's a contributing writer for Health Financial Management magazine and the Fort Worth Business Press. Herd was part of Leadership Fort Worth's Leading Edge 2013 class. He's an active member of First Presbyterian Church of Fort Worth. He and his daughter Caroline live in Fort Worth, Texas, where they enjoy pizza and movie nights, exploring the Trinity Trail, and spending time with friends. You can find more information at www.ourbeatinghearts.com. Herd, give me a little background, if you will. You grew up in a family that was involved with the Presbyterian Church. This was part of your upbringing, kind of born into that kind of family, going to church on Sunday is a regular part of your life.
Yes. So I grew up a lifelong Presbyterian. I grew up at First Presbyterian Church in Midland, and that was always just a part of kind of everyday life. Is on Sunday you get up and go to Sunday school, go to church, and that was just always kind of in the infrastructure and just kind of in the air I breathed growing up.
So this was a way of life. This was there were a value system. There was kind of a structure of right and wrong, of good and evil. Did you go to Vacation Bible School?
Absolutely.
Okay, and that's probably where you may have made your profession of faith, if you were even asked to make a profession of faith. Did you do that there, or?
Confirmation class in 7th grade is where when in the Presbyterian Church, you go through confirmation and kind of make the choice to actually join the church, and that's where it always kind of been there, but that's probably where I started really studying and taking it seriously.
So you go through confirmation. Judaism, we also have confirmation. Bar mitzvah at 13, confirmed at 15. You spend 2 more years in study, and you begin to study more of the ethics and the values and more of the infrastructure of Judaism, as opposed to the preparation for this life event of becoming a man or becoming accountable for yourself between you and God. Very similar to confirmation that you have in the Presbyterian Church, we have in Judaism. So this is where you kind of began formulating who you wanted to be, what you wanted to grow up to be like. Who were some of your role models growing up?
Really my dad was probably my biggest role model. It just, he grew up in, I talk about it in Our Beating Hearts. There's a chapter about just me growing up in West Texas and kind of those West Texas values of hard work and you don't complain and you do what you need to do to get the job done and you treat people honestly, you treat people fairly, And my dad was not one of many words, but I just saw it modeled in the way he treated others and the way he was. And I'd have to say my dad's probably my biggest role model.
All right, and he's the one who encouraged you to go on, get a college education?
Yes, yeah, my family, that was just a part of again, just kind of always there from the beginning of education was important, and we need to do that, yeah.
So you had kind of developed a plan for your life, didn't you?
Yes. Yes.
What did that plan look like?
And some of this is, I grew up in a really, loving family, and very fortunate to have a family that loved me, and I hate to say Leave It to Beaver, growing up, but it was kind of a Leave It to Beaver family, and my parents have been married at this point over 50 years, and so always together, and so I kind of thought, well, if I go to church and I do what I'm supposed to do, then the plan is going to be, well, this is going to work out the same for me. I'll work hard, and I'll hopefully get married, fall in love, and have 2 kids. And I joke about it in the book. I'll have a house with a white picket fence, and 2 cars in the garage, and we'll have the plan will be that, and never really put much more thought into it.
And so that took you on to college, where you did your undergraduate. And did you get a job, or did you stay on and go for your master's right away?
After I graduated from TCU, moved to Dallas and worked for about 4 years before I went to graduate school. And so that's when when I met Shannon, who I talk about in Our Beating Hearts, and Shannon was the girl who I'd always thought I would meet, and just hadn't met yet. But when I did, realized that she was someone very special, and so we met in Dallas, and things were kind of falling in place. I had a job, and making decent salary. I graduated from college, and then all of a sudden I meet this girl who was the girl that I'd always been hoping to meet, and so the plan was kind of ticking along right on track.
So you fall in love with Shannon Anderson. She's a party planning, you could describe her gift-giving socialite from East Texas, and kind of a different kind of you were kind of plains, more Wild West from the West Texas part, and she was a socialite. She was the one that had the bubbly personality and loved to laugh, and you were the steady Eddie. You were you had this not flatlined like that, but you were just rock solid. Not real boisterous. Maybe even a little reserved, conservative side, which is that Presbyterian background of good, strong, conservative values. Good, strong. You don't want to draw attention to yourself. You don't. With the you don't want the reputation to be in the life of the party. That doesn't really fit the model.
It's that strong Calvinist, Protestant work ethic. You don't make a show much, and you be solid, and that certainly was kind of in my upbringing and kind of in my personality.
So you're kind of attracted to someone who's somewhat opposite in personality style. You're more, I wouldn't say introvert, but you're just more deliberate, intentional, more let's plan it out, step 1, step 2, and here's how we're going to do things. And she was kind of, although she was a planner, a party planner, she was more exuberant, and that was kind of exciting for you, wasn't it?
She had a great laugh, and I talk about on our first date, just the laugh that she had, and that was just, always, you could always enter a room and know where Shannon was, because all you had to do was listen, and you'd hear the laugh someplace in the corner, and that's kind of how she always was. So yes.
She brought a tremendous amount of joy to you.
Yes.
And she was the girl that you realized was the girl of your dreams.
Yes, absolutely.
So you two get married, and everything's going well.
Everything's ticking along, right on track.
So now you've graduated college, right? Mm-hmm. You moved to Texas, to Dallas. You fall in love. The plan's really working. So what happened?
Well, and I talk about in the book, I call it the Black Swan, and the Black Swan is a term that's been coined. There's a person who wrote a book about it, and then basically it's this, unanticipated thing that happens that when it does, it absolutely changes your worldview. It changes everything. To use a dramatic example, 9/11 was a black swan in that, there's the life before 9/11, and then once the planes hit the towers, there's the life after 9/11, and it's the thing that comes crashing in that just upends everyone's world. And so I describe this black swan for my personal black swan or our family's black swan is, one day Shannon thought she had breathing problems, and we just thought she had some asthma, and she'd been getting short of breath, and she was 32 years old, and this would have been 2003. And we just thought she had, some asthma or something. And so she goes to the doctor, to a pulmonologist, to, see what's going on with her breathing problems. Pulmonologist takes an x-ray of her heart and or takes an x-ray of her chest. And when you looked at the x-ray, her heart was it was about 3 times the size it should have been. And I talk about in the book getting a phone call from her saying that I don't have a breathing problem, I have a heart problem. And the doctor said, we need to go see a cardiologist right now. We need to go to the hospital right now. And, you need to come here and come see me right now. And so I drive from my office to the doctor. And then, kind of to sum it up, after a very long day, of testing, of getting admitted to the hospital for observation, we figure out that she, for no reason, had congestive heart failure, and her heart was pumping at about 20% of where it should have been, and she was in a pretty dangerous state. And that set in motion basically the plan where things had been ticking along. That kind of put everything full stop, and we found out that this is not something she would be cured of. It would be a manageable condition, but something that she would have to manage the rest of her life. If she got better, there was a chance that she wouldn't have gotten better, and she could have died immediately or shortly thereafter.
So what are you thinking? You get this phone call. All right, this phone call, and I will put it in the category of the dreaded phone call, the one that is the deepest part of our heart. There's a small seed that's been planted there because we hear about other people's tragedies. And somewhere along the way, a little pellet is dropped into almost every heart when you fall in love, or you have a child, or you have a significant, you get a great job, or there's always that little seed that Satan deposits in there that all of a sudden that phone call comes. And
yes,
what are you thinking in the moment?
In the moment, you're, just, and I think I describe it in when I first heard the words that she was saying on the phone. I'm this disbelief is like the first thing. You're like, what? And I remember writing in the book that she's saying, the doctor said I don't have a breathing problem, I have a heart problem. And I'm like, did you say a heart problem? He's like, are you really sure that's what he said? And you just want to deny it at first. And so that's kind of the first thing is this is not real and this can't be happening. And then you slowly, driving from my office to the doctor's, and then you go see the doctor, and then they start telling you, things that you thought you would never hear, and just those dreaded conversations that that are supposed to happen to other people and not to you. And it starts to sink in slowly, but there's an immediate, you're just like, this isn't real. I've left my body and I'm in somebody else's body, and this is not real. It's kind of the first reaction that you have.
Now, at this point, have you already had your child?
No. So no children at this point. And we had planned on growing our family after I was in graduate school at this time as well, and planned on growing our family after graduate school. And so that was one of the other things is with the condition that she had, they said, it would be dangerous for her to ever have a child. Her heart couldn't support that. And so then that put that plan on hold as well. And so that's kind of the two big things that happened that day she was diagnosed is she has a lifelong, life-threatening condition. And then our plan for growing our family in the way we thought we were going to grow it is not going to happen. And so that's the black swan that crashed into our lives.
So she gets admitted to the hospital. You're now working with the team, a cardiology team, and they're trying to deal with fluids, which are keeping the heart from fully beating, and just all the issues to deal with congestive heart failure, which is an anomaly in a young person.
Yes, for her, I mean, she had no history of heart disease, was not overweight. No, I mean, there was really, to this day, they don't quite know exactly. I think that her heart had a genetic, predisposition, and they don't know why exactly it happened. And that's the other thing, is this came out of nowhere.
So you're now 3 years into your marriage, 5 years after you've met her, you get this diagnosis of congestive heart failure, and she's now in cardiac CCU, she is in intensive care?
No, I'm sorry, you broke up just a second.
I'm sorry, was she placed in intensive care right away?
She wasn't, and she was in observation, and they put her immediately on there's some miracle heart medicine that they put her on that immediately, and we stayed in observation for a couple days. So she wasn't in intensive care on that first time. It was mainly a couple days of observation, but then they really started the medicine that would hopefully help improve her heart function. And so that the initial piece was about a couple days of intense medicinal therapy, and then she started responding, and her heart started getting better, and we kind of got out of the hospital from there.
Okay, so you went from I could die to now there's the introduction of hope.
Yes,
absolutely. We've got a diagnosis which is important because excuse me, we have dominion over that which has a name. Mm-hmm. It's interesting when you go back to the Garden of Eden, and everything was brought to Adam to name, and everything that he named, he had dominion over. And so this thought is carried throughout Scripture, even to where Jesus says to his disciples, I give you the authority to trample on snakes and scorpions and overcome all the powers of the enemy. Nothing whatsoever shall harm you. He's given us that mandate back, that dominion over that which has a name. So doctors can't treat you unless they have a diagnosis, unless it has a name. So now you have a name, and because it has a name, you know what to pray for and what to pray against. It allows you to focus, to kind of fine-tune this prayer life that says, okay, now we know what we're dealing with, and now we know how to focus our prayers. So how did you respond to this from a faith perspective? Here, you were raised to be the steady Eddie, the man of the house, the spiritual head, the spiritual lead. Did you call your pastor? Did you call anybody from the church? Did you share this news with the rest of the family? How did all of that come together?
And so, so after the initial kind of emergency was over, and she's okay. So that's kind of, number one, okay, Shannon's okay. So then the big stuff starts sinking in about the plan being knocked off track, not being able to have children like you thought, her being, having this lifelong condition. And then in Our Beating Hearts, I have a chapter called Doubt. And for me, life had been smooth, kind of smooth sailing, and I somehow convinced myself that, well, I'm a good person. I believe in God. I believe in Jesus. Everything should go according to the plan because I'm a good person. And somehow I convinced myself unconsciously, didn't even mean to do it, that, there's a Santa Claus God who's going to provide everything that I deserve because I'm a good person. Completely wrong, and probably a fallacy that a lot of people make when they're young. And so when the world didn't go according to plan, the immediate thing was I kind of retreated and I got angry with God and said, well, wait a minute, I've been sold a bill of goods here. What what's happening. And I didn't really reach out to anyone immediately. I turned inward and just became angry and became upset about it. And like, well, why did this happen? There's no reason to it. It's not fair. It shouldn't have happened. And so I kind of went through a moment about a year or so where I tried to, kind of push the faith away or push that down. And again, I talk about in the book how no matter how hard I tried, that seed that was planted in West Texas, that faith seed, it couldn't completely go. And I realized that before I went too far down that path, I do need to reach out. I need to talk to somebody, and I need to reorient my faith and get back on track. And that's when I reached out to a pastor and told her everything that had occurred, and said, I need some help here because this isn't working right now. I'm angry and I need some help. I got to turn this around.
Was it God tugging at your heartstrings, or was it you facing the kind of, I'm just not in control. I can't fix this problem. I married this woman to love, to honor, and to protect her, and I can't fix her.
I think it was God working in my heart, and that seed of faith that, thank God, had been planted there. I think, I credit that with God or the Holy Spirit just saying, okay, here, let me take over from here a little bit, and you've tried it your way, and your way wasn't the right way, and let's lead you this way, and hopefully start you down the path of understanding that, you really aren't in control, and it's okay to have a real relationship with God. And in terms of, God's not Santa Claus. God is somebody who is there with you when times are good, but also with you when times are bad. And this is where I go into the book, and really the pastor that I talked to, pointed me to the obvious because it'd been there all along, but really pointed me to the Psalms and pointed me to David and showed me, here's a psalm of joy, here's a psalm of lament, and this, what you're feeling, what you're thinking, what you're experiencing is nothing new. It's been there from the beginning, and as a matter of fact, it's the story's right there in front of you. If you just slow down and get out of your head and turn it over a little bit to somebody else and read and think, and the answer's right there for you. And that's what really kind of turned me around in terms of accepting the fact that my plan didn't matter. There's obviously some other plan involved that I'm not in control of.
So the pastor turns you back to the scriptures. All of a sudden you don't feel as isolated, as alone in this, and realizing that God really does have everything under control, but not under your control.
And we may not always like it, and that's okay. I mean, I think that was the biggest thing, is it's okay. It's okay to not, you don't have to feel guilty about not liking it. You may have to accept it, you may have to work your way through it, but you certainly, if you again look in the scriptures and the psalm that I think it's Psalm 22, I believe, where it's really what Christ says on the cross. But my God, why have you forsaken me, and why have you left me? And so this is nothing new. And when you're young, you kind of feel like you're the first person to experience everything. Well, this is nothing new, and here's where it is.
So, as this began to play out, you returned to your faith, started to go back to church.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Shannon's condition is now manageable.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And now you're kind of regular cardiology visits, regular monitoring, but she's not deteriorating. She's
right.
So she's now kind of back to being stronger, not having as much of the symptomatic issues that go along with it.
After the first 6 months, really the first year, she responded to the medicine, and really almost came back back to as normal as can be. I think her heart was at 60-70% functionality instead of 20%, and that was almost a miracle in and of itself to come back that far. And then it just became, just a manageable thing. She took medicine, and we, almost kind of forgot about it, to tell you the truth, which was a good thing. And that it was just, we take the medicine and manage our diet, and life is, life returned to normal, at least the new normal.
So how did the new normal, what did the new plan look like now? So she's now on medication, she's responding to medication. What happens with your family plans?
So the new normal and became, for us, we always wanted to have a family and to have children, and felt that's what we were called to do in our marriage. And so from there, we started looking at adoption, and looking, and we've been blessed with friends who have had experience with adoption, and we kind of looked around and said, well, there's an answer right there. God's leading us someplace. And so we can't have our own biological children, but look at the home that we could give of somebody, and look at the love that we have to share. And so we started looking at that. And again, me being the sober one, or the one who doesn't like to deviate too far out of the norm, she was there a lot quicker than I was. But I had an experience at the Gladney agency in Fort Worth. There was a picnic they had, and we went to it just to kind of check it out. And I remember, and writing about this in the book, I looked around and saw all these kids that were having fun, and saw their parents, and saw all these families. And I realized that, wow, this is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to, adopt a child and have a child of our own. And this is the way it's supposed to work. And that's when I fully kind of feel like the cloud of doubt and the cloud of anger kind of dissipated. And now there's this new hope. And the new hope was bringing, growing a family and providing this, loving somebody. And that was a wonderful day.
Well, I can relate to that. My daughter's adopted.
Oh, wonderful.
And 28,
Yeah.
28 years ago, I got her as a newborn, and she was, and still is, the one that has her daddy's heart wrapped right around her finger.
Yes.
As you well know. So,
we can relate to each other there. Absolutely.
No question. I mean, she and I speak every day, and that saying that the adopted children don't grow under our hearts, but in our hearts. There's a real depth of connection that in some cases I think is deeper. I know there's a natural bond between natural birth, but she believes that I was chosen by God to be her dad, and I believe that she was chosen by God to be my daughter.
Absolutely.
And we look identical.
That's wonderful. And that's just neat. You see that so often. Yeah, right. That's so neat.
It's like, it's unmistakable that this is my child, but she has none of my DNA.
Right, absolutely. That's great.
So you two adopt. You go through the adoption process?
Yes.
Okay, and your wife's health condition, of course, has to be disclosed.
Yes.
Okay, and was there any concern, any trepidation?
I mean, it was, again, life was normal. I mean, everything was normal. The doctors said everything was great. I mean, everything was great. So, no, absolutely, did not seem an issue at all.
Okay, so life is normal. You go through the adoption process. Tell me, how was that process for you? And now, how old was the child?
Newborn, yeah.
Okay, so you had a newborn baby. And did this put any strain on Shannon as far as taking care of a newborn?
No, I mean, it was her health was great.
Okay, so when did things start to shift? Because you had this Black Swan moment. You recover from that Black Swan moment. You get things manageable, and now the plan's back in gear. You're now shifted from neutral, well, really from reverse into neutral. Now you're back into drive.
Now we're back and things are moving along, and we have a family, and her health is good. And it really wasn't until about 2014, really 2015, when there's some symptoms and things started coming back, and so the medicines that used to work really good all of a sudden stopped working as well, and it was kind of tweaking medicines, and so it was quite quite a long bit of time from 2003 to 2015. But then all of a sudden things just started veering off track again.
And how was your response this time to seeing the plan, seeing your wife now who had been strong? She was raised in a Baptist church, but she went along with you into the Presbyterian church?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, that was when we got married. She joined the Presbyterian church.
So you went through your crisis of faith, and now you're back, and you're strong, and you're raising your daughter in the church, and you come to this now time wherein symptoms are starting to show up. What's your response to it?
I mean, obviously worry and scared and disappointment, and trying to understand, let's get her well. But I think my response this time was different than last time in that my focus was outward and focus was on her, and I didn't, I'd wrestled with God, and you mentioned before that we went live talking about Jacob wrestling with God. Well, I had my moment and I wrestled with God, and I realized, that life isn't going to always go well, and it doesn't go well for millions of people, and that doesn't mean God isn't there. It doesn't mean God doesn't love you and love his children, but I've already had that, and so that was almost a preparation for me. I think for the second go around I was on solid ground from a faith standpoint, and so didn't really even enter the equation in terms of no effect on the faith. It was more that my faith was there, and I was going to be there and do what I needed to do to help Shannon.
And so now you're the Proverbs 31 husband. You're now the one who's uplifting and encouraging and praying and reading the Psalms and going back in and continuing a relationship with the church and a relationship with God. And it's no longer I'm angry with you, I don't understand why now.
Right.
Has got to be a question. Everything was going fine, why now? And you launched a pretty aggressive battle to try to find the right medications to get things under control. What happened during this process?
During that process, she had a implantable cardiac defibrillator put in her chest, and that basically, if her heart got out of rhythm, then it would go off, and it would put her heart back in the right rhythm. And so, that was something that actually saved her life several times. I talk about it in the book. And then it was this kind of one thing after another, and finally, after fighting kind of that battle through 2015, towards the end of 2015, the doctors finally said that the medicines aren't working. The ICD's been going off multiple times. It's time for a transplant, and that's the next step. Otherwise, her life will. This heart does not have much time left.
Right.
I think it's the way they framed it to us, and so they put her on the transplant list, and we thought that would be our scary thing, but that would be our next thing that we do that will prolong her life and allow her to have a normal life.
So, did she get a transplant? Did she make it to that point?
So we got listed, went through the whole transplant testing and process in late 2015. And there's a whole very involved process with that. And then she was approved, I think, in November of 2015, and she was all excited. She said, "I'm on the list. I made it." And we had a really that was like a really good day. And then didn't go live on the list until January of 2016. So we had a moment where we could say, let's list ourselves or not. And she was actually feeling a little bit better. So we said, let's wait till after Christmas. We'll get through the holidays, and then you can go live. And it'll probably take 3 or 4 months or more. It could be 6 months or longer.
Right.
And so she went live on the transplant list in January of 2016 and was actually matched with a donor heart 24 days later. And so that was kind of an amazing thing that she was matched so fast. And so then went to the hospital and had a successful transplant operation. and I write about this in the book, and this is where I start, I had a blog on Carrying Bridge where I start giving updates about Shannon's condition, and so had the transplant, had a successful operation, but then encountered a complication after the 3 days in the hospital, and that's really a complication that she never recovered from, and after a 2-month battle in the hospital, Shannon passed away, and actually almost right at 2 years ago. It'll be 2 years, March 17th, 2018 will be 2 years ago. And that's kind of when you can only imagine what that would do to somebody and how that would make you feel.
The grief that you felt, how did you process that? First of all, you've got a daughter now.
Yeah.
She's lost her mother, you've lost your best friend, and you have this renewed faith that's now not new anymore. It's matured.
Mm-hmm.
It's been a 10 or 12-year period since the crisis of faith, and now you're facing what you describe as a sword that always hung over your head, that it was always possible that you could lose your wife. And you had to live with that sometime shadow, sometime in focus, but you describe it as, what did you say, Damocles' sword?
Yes,
Okay.
that's what I describe in the book, yes.
Over your head. How did you process this?
What I did, and for me, I writing became a way for me to process, and I didn't intend to write this book, and I started writing while Shane was in the hospital, and started writing on Carrying Bridge, and that kind of rallied this whole community around us to pray for us and to lift us up, and the words that came out were words that I, being a reserved, quiet person, as we talked about in the beginning, they weren't kind of natural for me to share. I've always written, I've always been a writer for personal things, but never kind of throwing it out there. And so I shared my words with everybody, and that became a source of strength. And so when I went home and this had happened and I didn't know what else to do, I just kept writing, and I wanted to write the story of Shannon and me. I wanted the world to know who she was and how special she was, and I wanted people to understand this journey, and that was the main, one of the main things. But then also, in addition to writing, because I had been active in church, because I had a faith community around me, I leaned on my friends, I leaned on my family, I leaned on this community, and that became a time of, all the deposits I'd made throughout my life and with relationships, I came time to draw on those deposits, and I was thankful that I had some bank account balances to draw on, when the crisis hits, it's too late to start making those deposits, and I was thankful that I'd been led in a way to live where I had friends, I had family, I had lots of people to lean on, and those two things, the writing and then really the community to support me, that became my way forward.
As God intended for the body to uplift one another, to continue to be an undergirding for times of difficulty.
Yeah, absolutely.
You describe grief as a tunnel.
Mm-hmm.
How do you translate that and help people understand what it's like to have this kind of loss and the process of grief for a person of faith? There still is loss. There still is real, live grief and heartbreak.
Right. I mean, grief is it's a real thing, and it's disorienting, and I describe it like a tunnel, because your world all of a sudden just kind of, it becomes very small, and it just collapses, and you're in this dark place, and you can't see the larger world that's out there, and you don't know what direction you're supposed to go. You don't know if you're moving forward. You don't know if you're moving backward. You're just in this very dark place that feels very small. And that's the time when, for me, is you reach out your hand and you hope there's a hand to pull you along, because you don't know where to go. And that's the tunnel analogy that I talk about in the book. And it's important that, you can get lost in that tunnel. Right. And that's what grief can do is it can overwhelm you, where you get lost and you have a hard time finding your way out of it. And then for me, it was the writing of the book. It was leaning on my friends. It was actually going to grief counseling. It was reaching out and having, grabbing hold of those hands to help pull me along.
So that was good for you, but then you have a grief-stricken child, and you're having to balance your own grief with offering comfort and trying to help guide your child through the loss of her mother.
Right.
How did you process that?
Yeah, that is, I'm blessed with people to help me, but also, that's where we became very close in terms of we go through this grief together, and it's okay you want to be strong for your child, and you want to make sure that they always know that they're safe and that they're taken care of. But you also can be vulnerable and just hold each other and love each other. And that's, get yourself together, through that together. Fort Worth is blessed. There's a grief place in Fort Worth called the Warm Place. That's actually a place for children who've lost a parent, and, reached out to them. And again, that's a part of that community. And so that's been a great thing for my family and for us. But I think the biggest thing is just being real with your child and being caring, and always making sure that they know they're safe, but they also can know it's okay that you're sad, and we're going to get through this together. I think kind of those combinations is what's worked for me.
It's great when there's people around supporting you and bringing meals to you and checking in on you, but then there's a time that comes around 8:30 or 9 o'clock when this phone stops ringing and people stop visiting, and there's about a 12-hour gap between this time of comforting and now the reality of what you're, that alone time. Now I've tucked my daughter into bed, I've said goodnight to her, and now I'm left with me.
Right. There's a dark and silent house. Yes.
All right. How was that for you, and how did your relationship with Jesus and your faith really come to become what it is today? Those are the moments, and I don't know why I to this day I can only call it a calling. That's the moments when I wrote the book. I talk about. I don't think I talk about this in the book, but I woke up one morning, and I'd been doing the writing on Carrying Bridge, and I'd been writing in my journal, and I woke up like at 5 o'clock in the morning, and I saw this outline of a story. I saw this whole story of Shannon and me and this journey, and I wrote the outline, I think from 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. That became the outline of the book. And then I spent the next 6 months, I told myself, I'm going to write a book, and I'm going to share this story. I want to share who Shannon was. I want to share this story, and I can't explain why. And all I can say, it was a calling that I needed to write the book. And so I spent the next 6 months in those dark hours, as you described, writing. And I just wrote, and then through a series of events was able to turn it into a book that I'm sharing with people. And then that's just become, kind of its own special thing. And again, another way I've handled the grief. What is your message in talking to someone right now who's out there struggling with loss, that thinks that God's abandoned them, or that they're alone in this? What would you say to them that you discovered by traveling through this tunnel yourself?
Right.
That would give them the hope that you were able to find even in grief. You found hope.
I think the biggest message is that you're not alone, and everything that you have experienced and are experiencing has been felt by others, and they've gotten through it. And so, number one is you're not alone. Number two is God's going to be there with you during the highs, but also God's there with you in the lows. And again, going back to the Psalms and going back to what we were talking about earlier, is God's been there, and He understands. And then I think the third piece is just look at the message of Easter, look at the message of Christ, and look at what happened. Look at the hope that came out of tragedy. And so what you're going through is normal, and feelings of anger and resentment are normal. They've been there since the beginning. But also, more importantly, there is hope. You may not understand it; it may not all make sense, but there's certainly hope that you have to orient yourself towards hope, and that's how you're going to ultimately get through it.
What will you do this Saturday when the world is celebrating St. Patrick's Day, and you're celebrating the second anniversary of Shannon's passing?
I'll probably. My daughter and I, and we're going to be with friends and out of town, and we're going to probably just look up at the sky and say, happy St. Patrick's Day, and Shannon, we love you and we miss you, but we know that you live in our hearts forever, and you will be with us forever in some way or another, and we miss you, but we love you.
So you've been able to get to the point now where, from a grief perspective, you're able to, I don't want to say compartmentalize, but put it into perspective that grief is real.
Yes.
That part of your heart that was Shannon will always be hers, right? And that there's no betrayal, that if you decide in a year or even now that you decided you would want to date or you'd want to get on with life, that it's not leaving her or abandoning her, that you've found a place that you've now realized that God has done a work in you, and
yes.
This is a part of your testimony, and that you are an overcomer by the word of your testimony and the blood of the Lamb, and that you've now got the right perspective on this balance of God and life, and that life is not easy. But God never made you that promise that it would be easy.
Right. That's it.
And the potholes, and this is one of those deep gaps. It's a sinkhole, if you will, in your life, that you had to journey to the bottom of it to be able to climb out of it and find yourself on the other side of grief, which is despair to hope, and it's a journey.
Absolutely, and I describe it, in the book as grief. Like, once learning to live with grief, you're like an amputee, and you will learn to walk again, and you can overcome, and you can learn to walk again, but you're changed, and for me, it was a matter of, instead of grief controlling me and grief owning me, I wanted to own it, and it's there, and it will always be there in some form, but now it's a lot smaller, and so instead of the tunnel being around me, I now kind of have it here in my hands, and I can control it. I kind of own it, but I'm forever changed.
Right.
But I can move forward because I've kind of wrestled with it and got it down to where I own the grief. It doesn't own me. Is the way I would explain it to somebody.
So you feel that this whole journey was really for you to be called to talk about God, who's there for you in the darkest hours, and that when you are really at a point of doubt, at a point of despair, a point of hopelessness, that you find that seed, as you said, that was planted so long ago, that was the only ray of sunshine, one little beacon, one little match in the darkness. It was the only place that was light, because you were surrounded with despair.
Right.
And that turned into a flame that then began to illuminate. Now you live in light and not darkness, but yet you still will have grief. You will miss her for the rest of your life. But you know where she is.
Yes.
Because she took this faith journey with you.
Absolutely.
And your daughter knows where she is. because
Absolutely.
she also is taking this faith journey with you. What resources are you now making available to people on the web, and to kind of be now a ambassador to help others navigate through grief?
I mean, I mainly just have the website and ourbeatinghearts.com, and then really the book. Well, I apologize. We got cut off there. The book that's on Amazon is just my story, and I'm not trying to, I'm just trying. I wanted to tell a story that honored Shannon, and wanted to just put a story together that showed people what this journey looks like, and that's the main thing. Is just, that's the story, and I hope if people can relate to it, if people can get some hope from it, if it can help comfort somebody if they're kind of in their dark night of soul, that's really what I have, and that's what I want it to be. It's just my simple story that I wanted to share with people.
Well, I want to thank you,
Herd,
for writing this. Our Beating Hearts by Herd Midkiff, a memoir. It's as much about God as it is about Shannon. It's as much about the redeeming power of faith in the one who died for you, so that you could understand how loss is processed, how loss is a part of God's economy, that He's there for us in the good times and the bad times, that He's steady and stable and incorruptible. And we are the ones that change, and we're the ones that move. He never moves. He'll never leave you, and He'll never forsake you. And you find that underlying theme throughout the entire book in this memoir about how God was always there. It was Herd himself that moved away, but Herd made the decision in despair to reach back out. And because he did that, he was able to pull together into a community that wound up being his support system and wound up bringing him comfort in the darkest hours. The book is called Our Beating Hearts by Herd Midkiff. Right now you can go to ignitingnation.com, click on Books and Media, scroll to today's date at the 12 o'clock hour, click on it, it'll take you right to Amazon, and get a copy for yourself. Herd Midkiff, thank you so much for sharing this story and the memory of Shannon with us and our audience.
Absolutely. I appreciate it very much.
God bless you, my friend.
All right. God bless. Thank you.
Thank you. And that ends our live broadcast day, but that doesn't mean we go off the air. We provide all of our replays on YouTube and on WND TV. You can catch all of our replays at ignitingnation.com. Just click on prior shows and it'll take you right to today's shows. This will replay throughout the day, and we will see you back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Central Time here in our studios in Birmingham, Alabama. Look for us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, and LinkedIn under Igniting a Nation. Until we see you right back here tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., we bid you shalom.